up, everybody? We're back out of the studio. But we're in 3 studios. We're coming to you live in his house. Girl, Lori Branch.
Hey.
Mega McFall.
Hey, Lori.
Lori.
Thanks for the shout out on another episode of the Vintage House. It's good to be with the family, although we're social distanced. What's up, Lauren?
What's up?
I love it. We never get to do this. We are rarely in studio at the same time. This is fantastic.
Well, we are doing it for the culture, as we do always. Co-host Lori Branch, Lauren Lowry, and your main man Mega are happy to be with you all for another episode of the Vintage House, but not just any episode. Tell us what we have tonight going on, folks. Lauren?
We have an unbelievable show tonight. First of all, we're just going to chit-chat a little bit. We're just going to wing. We're so excited to be together. We're just going to wing it. But while we're winging it, we're going to talk a little bit about the what informed house music culture before the Warehouse came to Chicago. What was happening in Chicago? There's a lot of people with a lot of information out there, and a lot of people who are still here in the world and that we need to talk to about that, so people can talk to us about what was happening in Chicago, so we can put together this timeline. How important is the timeline, Lori?
You know, people have been talking about timeline for decades. You know, I feel like as long as we've been in here, people have been trying to track the history of, like, when did this movement start? And it's not just us. You know, it's an international curiosity.
It is.
I think that I can't tell you how many interviews that I've done, as well as many of the people behind you. You know, you look at Freddie and David Risquet and Jesse De La Pena and Alan King, and you know, and yourself. You know, folks who have been approached by scholars and by youth and by you know, music aficionados who just really want to understand the genesis of it. It's kind of like the birth of a country. It's like the birth of a sound. And so I think that's an important thing. There have been a lot of people who've done amazing jobs at taking a stab at it. It's always an incomplete history. Vince Lawrence's piece, 312 Soul, amazing. And his is more than house music. It's really about the history of black music in Chicago, where he paints a picture of a timeline. And then you have books like Micah Salkind's Do You Remember House, which does a very similar job. You had the wonderful exhibit at the Cultural Center, you know, with David Chavez and the crew that sort of put that piece together a couple of years ago, that actually did a timeline. And it's always an incomplete story, you know, because there's so many elements to the story. There's so many voices that have yet to be heard. And so, you know, it kind of depends on what we think is important. I think a timeline is important because it gives people a place of reference and a place to land. So when you think about the Warehouse, or you think about house music and what birthed that, you know, we immediately sort of think of punk and disco, but what birthed that? You know, sort of what's the evolution of that? So I think tonight we wanted to spend a little bit of time, you know, talking about those earlier years, that sort of house culture, as E. Smooth likes to describe it, before the house canon started happening. So I think that's, you know, we want to spend a little time talking about that.
And indeed, and we'll get a little bit in as to how things accelerated with the canon. To your point, you made a great reference to the fact that people need a baseline, and starting with that baseline, many people have started at different points. I actually did a timeline in '94 with the editorial team at Street Sound magazine, which was a Canadian piece, and we started in '81. There's some rationale to it, but certainly we know that it goes further back, and the roots are deep and rich. And so we have a lot to converse about tonight, and a little bit of time on our hands to do so.
We have a long time on our hands, so.
my Street Sound, 94.
What is that, Kevin?
Starting with archives is so critical, and given this is the Vintage House show, and this is what it's all about. Kevin, what was that again? Show
Yeah,
me.
show us that. Show us
Oh yeah, so this is Street Sound magazine, 94 August, and in it is a timeline starting in 81 of house music.
I love it. And what were you guys talking about in this timeline? I'd love to know what's in there.
Oh my gosh, we compiled a set of milestones, and this was actually the third edition of this effort. But we talked about who the pioneers were, who the trailblazers were. We talked a lot about record labels and companies that were pushing out the music, and a little bit about those that were consuming, the dancers, and the artists that were really involved and key in the process. So it's an interesting.
Kevin, I think that's an interesting point that you guys picked 1981, and I'd love to know. I wish we could hear from folks who are watching. When you think about the history of house music, whether that's culture or canon, what have you, what makes you pick a certain point in time?
That's a great
as
question.
The start of that.
Yeah.
So I've seen like a lot of folks go 1977, and they do that because they very intentionally want to include like the Warehouse, because that's when the Warehouse started.
Yes.
I've heard folks say 80, 81. I've heard people say 80 as late as 85. What are your thoughts on like those starting points?
I think there were certainly milestones that occurred in many of those banner years. 77 and through 79 was the epitome of disco, if you will, and there was a lot happening until that moment where the effort to drive disco underground occurred in a few blocks from where I'm broadcasting from, over at White Sox or Comiskey Park. The disco demolition happened. That was certainly a monumental milestone, along with things like Disco DAI locally, right here in Chicago, as a radio station dedicated to that sound, to bringing across the airways a lot of the sounds and experiences that were happening in clubs, as we were talking about before we came on air. So it was those milestones, and probably with regard to personal reference points, right, where people have milestones that were personal to them occurred. That's where they anchor their discussions. I think that's my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Disco Day. What I love is there's a book. Lauren, you're a scholar, so you might know the name of this book. When and Where I Enter, or something like that. It's about like Black women history, what have you. But I always feel like that's the story for house music. It's like often it begins when I entered. Whoever's telling the story, it's like when I came into it, that's when it started. And so you have folks, and look, life happens. So you have people who were really, really involved, for 2-3 years, from 79 to 80, 81, and then they went away to college, and they were gone for 5 years. And so the people who came in 83 will say, you weren't there because I entered in 83 and I never saw you, and it's like, well, you weren't there in 80 when and so it's a really interesting moment. And I love that there's so much debate around that, like 10-year period, like why it matters about where people started and where they entered, that passion that folks come to this discussion with about, why it's important to start at this date, or what was relevant at the time. It's really mind-boggling to me. I absolutely love it. I think it makes for a great discussion, if nothing else.
Absolutely, and Lauren, you've had some discussions with other scholars and those who recognize what they cite to be the origins.
Well, I try to talk to the scholars like yourselves. Okay, the scholars who were around in that time frame. And then, people who have a different point of view. Again, the key for me is always having a historical perspective and having a perspective that is unbiased. Right. So if you start from the beginning, let's talk about, and I appreciate the 312 Soul project, but there's several projects that attack Black music that have been done over the years, from the 60s to the 70s. I'm going to start off with a couple of really interesting books that really attempt to inform how house music might have been created through blues, disco, funk, etc. So this is an interesting book that, of course, with my thing on, it's going to be hard to see.
No, we're seeing it good.
Yep.
I'm seeing it pretty good. It's fading out on mine. But it's about the Chicago music scene in the 60s and the 70s. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, towards the end there, it attacks what was happening with disco. How some of these clubs and how Chicago created its own disco scene. But it attacks it from a very, maybe European perspective. So it's hard to say how that's going. But that perspective is also important to know. So if we're looking at perspectives, we have to look at all points of views. That's gay, straight, that's black, white, or whatever, Latin, that we sometimes forget. We also forget South Side, West Side. What was happening on the West Side with the gay scene? What was happening on the South Side? What was happening
There
on
was
the
a
West
gay
Side?
scene on the West Side? Why didn't nobody tell me?
So we got to figure it out. So we're going to bring in a truth scholar. We're going to bring in a truth scholar, but a pioneer, George Daniels, in just a little bit. But here's another book that attacked the conversations about music in Chicago.
Not seeing that one as well.
Hold it a little closer. Can't see that one.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. This one is fading out. So it's called the Black Music and the Black Musician and the White City. Race,
Oh wow. Okay.
and music culture, 1900 to 1967. So I look at that because, again, so what was happening in this 67 that then informed more R&B, funk, that kind of thing? What was happening? And again, you see these correlations across the board, certainly, with how Chicago reacts to black music and how Chicago reacts to black music spaces, in terms of its ability to eliminate entire landscapes of black music. If you don't know, IIT sits on what used to be Chicago's Jazz Row. They killed it all in the 1950s to put in IIT. And they just had a celebration. Someone did some excavation and they found an interesting thing. They were like, "Oh gosh, let's celebrate this relic that we demolished." So before we get in trouble for it. But I think the artifacts are critical. We need artifacts from the 70s that really say this was something that was going on. But what do you think? Do you think? I've got one other quick story and then I'll stop. But one of my colleagues, Tony Burrows, suggests that in the late 1960s, 70s, there was a gay night at a club that was on 76th or 75th in Cottage Grove. So I used to go there all the time. His friends' parents owned the club, and they would go there just do regular nights as party. On Tuesday night, it was all gay people, and it was packed. This is 1969, 1970, 1971. It says, so this culture was, sort of, and he said the music was definitely all sort of moving towards what would be funk, what would be disco, what was sort of forming at that time. So it was definitely different music. There was definitely a different music, definitely different DJs, different things were happening there. So in that time, clearly gay people were getting together on the South Side doing their thing.
I mean, you had the Jeffrey Pub. I don't know the year that it started, but it was around the same time. That's one of those, that is, I think, the oldest gay club, in the whole state, from what I understand.
Yeah, they celebrated 50 years recently.
I think it's maybe older than that.
You think so?
I think so. We need an expert.
That's where we are certainly looking towards someone perhaps of a few older years than us. But I wanted to go back to a point that you made about spaces, particularly as it relates to Chicago, because Chicago, it was a mecca of the black music industry for some time. And what emerged after IIT pushed Jazz Row out was a slightly northerly movement to the 20s, right, of Michigan Avenue. And Motor Row was also Record Row for Chicago for a while. And the blues and R&B labels took root there. And so I think that's an interesting point as well, that there was this migratory pattern, because even before probably Jazz Row here in Bronzeville, there was the scene, the let's say Chicago Renaissance, or of jazz music and gospel music, was happening a little further south in this migratory area in which people from the South had migrated to and settled, right, in between, some say between 51st and 23rd Street, right, as some of Bronzeville's historic boundaries. And so it's great to know that there's some resiliency, if you will, in the music. And we see it even today with house music, in that it's been pushed underground. You know, the disco piece, an influence, was pushed underground, and what emerged was house music. We keep it moving, and that's a trait, right? That's important.
I think you can't. I wonder if it's that you can't have one without the other. You know, I just finished reading a really interesting book. It came out a few years ago. You might have heard of it. It's called Ghosts in the Schoolyard, and it's by Eve Ewing.
Yes.
And really, really interesting. I've had it on my bookshelf for a couple of years, and I finally, in this Corona time, have some time to read. So I read it straight through, and I was like, wow, this is really, really good stuff. And and if you know Black history in Chicago, none of it's sort of new to you, but the way that she curated it around the closing of these schools, in 2013, was really interesting, because it wasn't just about like what happened that year. Racism didn't start in 2013. Bronzeville, sort of the pressures of racism on a particular part in the community that stretched decades beforehand was what made happen in 2013.
That's right.
And that's a terrible thing that happened. But I also think, like you're saying, it's sort of like how pressure, you can't have a diamond without pressure. You can't have movement without resistance. And that I think that some of this wonderful thing that has come out of Chicago that we understand as house, I don't know that it could have happened without the resistance and the pressure and the pushing underground, the people confined in certain spaces.
That's right.
And the people having to, sort of, fend for themselves, because the system was against you. Home clubs, you couldn't sort of be free. So you create this sense of pressure that really does force you to be way more artistic, way more talented, and to create something that doesn't exist.
So we've just been joined by the one and only, and certainly legendary, if I may add that to the introduction. We're graced by the presence of Mr. George Daniels. George, how are you this evening, and how are you doing?
We got to make George put his video and audio on. So, he's trying to get there.
There he is.
Can you hear us? We can see you. Can't hear you, George. He's got to get his audio on. Keep trying for the audio. We can see you, can't hear you. Oh, Lord, I don't know what he did now.
Okay, well, so, we're going to keep talking until he is able to join us.
We need Lori. I wonder where she wants to start this discussion about sort of pre-house. Because I'm thinking, I don't know if we want to say if the warehouse started in 1977, do we want to, and people suggest that house music was formed by that. Craig Cannon suggested 1968 or 69. He was already, having house parties in which he suggested it was house. George, can you hear us?
He can hear us, but his device mic isn't set up yet. So we'll give him a minute. It's good to see you, though, young man. You're looking very well there.
Can you hear us?
And so we're we're all patient as we work through all of the
I'm gonna
opportunities.
see if I can hear.
Yeah.
Lori, where do you think you want to start sort of the conversation around putting together this timeline? Do we start in 1975, 74? Where do you sort of your thoughts when you're talking to people, where do you think we should start?
Well, Melody Diggs just chimed in and said, Jeffrey Paul was around in the '60s, and so I think
Nice.
that I almost feel like it's arbitrary. But I don't want to diminish it either. Oh, there he is.
Yep,
Yeah,
we've got his video. We just can't
Oh, we
hear
got
him
the
yet.
video.
He may have to call one of us.
I'm gonna call
It
him
might
now.
be easier to call in.
Yeah.
What's
Or-
up, everybody
or
that's
he can
watching?
dial the
Rachel
number.
Davenport, Kendall Lloyd, John Young.
I'll call
Appreciate
him.
y'all watching the show.
Yeah, shout out Jay
Getting it
Young,
together here.
Kendall Lloyd, last week's Vintage House guest with Lauren.
Hey, George.
Yes, we
Yeah,
can.
hear you. Yay, great.
We can hear
Very
you.
slightly.
Can you hear us, George?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
All right.
Myself though, but I guess. Oh, what I do?
Yep, you're good. Don't do anything else except
Just
talk
stay
to
right
us.
there.
Talk to us.
Am I supposed to see me?
Sometimes.
You see,
But
you,
we see you.
we see you, so that's important. And we're recording this. Kevin, you're recording this, right?
Yes.
I'm gonna make the makeup is right.
You look fantastic. I'm close to the screen. So, George, you know what? We're just going to throw you in real quick. You know, we're talking about Chicago pre-house music. So, people suggest that the Warehouse house music was given its name by the Warehouse. But we're trying to speak to what was happening mid-70s, 74, 75, 76. From your point of view, what was the culture, sort of black music culture? Where were people partying? How was house music informed?
Well, the whole thing, the transition came because soul music changed to R&B, because Billboard magazine changed, because all of our music is soul music. And so the transition came when black music started flying over the top.
Hmm.
Can you talk closer to the mic? I can barely. You're jumbled a little bit. Talk closer to the mic for me if you could.
Hear me now? That's better.
We want to see you, but yeah, okay. We want to see you, but we want to hear you better too. So go ahead.
Oh God, I don't see you now.
You had him
Technology.
touch something.
Just hit the thing again. Hit it again.
Yep. I'll bring his
hit the
video back.
again.
There
There
he
we go.
is.
Okay, go ahead. We lost you all together now, George.
So
There he is.
we go.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, George. Can we hear you?
Lost his audio.
George, go ahead. Can we hear you?
I can hear you.
We can hear you too. Go ahead.
What was the question?
So the question is again, so you were just suggesting that the music culture changed in the mid '70s because R&B went to pop.
There
It
you
was
go.
always house music, and then they turned it into disco.
yes,
Okay, and see that's because again, what we're going through now, which is a whole nother story. But the culture, my father used to always tell me, there's only one color. Take one coat and you can cover any color, and that's black. And that's what our music has always done, and the power of it. And so that transitions into disco, what have you, because soul music always stayed there. There were some artists that were soul artists that created songs relative to disco. I mean, you want to go back to like so many. Tyrone Davis did a couple of songs that were disco style based upon who was buying what.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it goes back to the blues, how, you know, the white version of the blues is country and western.
Yep. Absolutely.
And so when I go to clubs and what have you, so-called blues clubs, and I see people that don't look like me, they're not playing the blues, they're emulating the blues. See, the blues is about the pain and lifestyle. You know, Muddy Waters, and then they pick cotton.
That's right.
They knew what it was to have a guitar with one string. You know, see, so it's a thing of understanding where our music comes from and how it has really helped us. And not, I got to segue here because what we're going through right now, there's now one current song that's relative to the situation we're dealing with right now. But I bet you I could pull 10,000 songs from the 70s that will give us the inspiration, motivation to deal with this virus stuff we're dealing with. But there's no music at all, and hip hop ain't even dealing with it. You know, see, so when we go back to that era, it was always about the community. It was always about the people, the music. The people dictated the music. The music didn't dictate what we did.
That's right.
And so the 70s, what have you, I mean, when you're talking about groups like the Stylistic, Dramatics, the Shy Lights, Wilson Pickett, you know, MFSB, the instrumentals from Philly and
The Philly.
Freddie
Yeah.
Jackson. I mean, the list goes on with the Spinners, the Delphonics, the Jones Girls. I mean, Betty Wright, who's still around. These are the artists that were not just vocalists. Each and every one of them had their own sound, their own style, and it motivated the masses. Because
Let's
those
talk about
songs resonated with young people and their parents.
Let's talk about Chicago. Let's bring it back to Chicago mid 70s.
Okay.
You know, because again, if we're saying if we start house music in 1977 when the Warehouse was birthed, 1975, 1976. Were there disco clubs? Where were people partying? Donna Summer was hot. What was happening in Chicago around that? Were people coming to the store for disco music? And where were they partying? What was going on?
Yeah.
Well, the transition, you know, from disco, house into disco, but, you know, there were clubs that played disco in the black community. But, you know, disco, like, I was one of maybe 6, 7 people that were black that they allowed into Faces. Faces was like the sister club to Studio 54 in New York. If you had a membership to Faces, you could go on Studio 54 and vice versa.
Where was
And
Faces?
see,
Where
so
was Faces?
Yeah.
Faces is on Rush Street.
I
Yeah.
remember that. I
Yes.
remember
This
Faces.
is where because remember when they first put the first Starbucks on Rush Street?
Yes. That's
Before
about.
they moved it.
Yeah.
That the spot where that first Starbucks was, that's where Faces was on Rush Street. And I mean, you know, you had Faces, and then you had Zorene's. Now, you know Newberry Plaza?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Still around the corner on State Street. That lobby where the restaurant is, it's gonna blow your mind because Zorene's was the sister club here, well, club like Faces. You left Faces and you went to Zorene. It was across the lobby in the Newberry Plaza because there was a steakhouse that started in Newberry Plaza called Arnie's. Arnie's Steakhouse. And his wife had the disco across the lobby in Newberry Plaza called Zorene's. Now I'm gonna drop some knowledge on you right now, gonna mess you up.
We're ready for it.
You know what Arnie's last name was?
What?
Morton.
Morton Steakhouse.
Oh,
Arnie's,
Interesting.
from there it turned into Morton Steakhouses all across the country.
Interesting. Wow.
Oh yeah. See, so it was a thing where Rush Street back then, you know, because you know the black folks, we if we were on North Side, we hung on Wells, Old Town.
Yes.
Because, you know, you had Old Town guards behind there. Really Green was still, you know, see, I moved to 1660 North LaSalle in 1973.
Okay.
I moved from 8107 Ellis. And the craziest thing, the most popular TV show was The Jeffersons.
Yep.
And
this
what was that theme
70s.
song?
Moving on up.
Hold up,
And
right?
guess what I did? I swear I did. I went to this building. The building is right there across from the gas station, 1600 on LaSalle. And that was Eugenie Square back then.
Yep.
I got a 1-bedroom with a balcony on the 4108 by
Oh, wow.
apartment. My rent was $290 a month. That was 1973.
I need that lease. Where's that lease?
I wish I had it too. But eventually the building turned to condos in 76, and I bought 2 condos in that building.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And I was still like in my late 20s and what have you. I was young.
So you were walking over to Faces. You were walking over to Rush Street back in that day. That was real close.
Yeah, well, no, you had to
It's
drive.
yeah.
I had a Delta 88 convertible. Goddamn. Canary yellow. Man, let me tell you something. And I had my big afro. too.
Oldsmobile.
Hey,
Tell him
look, you talk
nothing.
about, hey, I have my 8 tracks playing. I put on Shaft.
Oh, Lord.
Rolling
Okay,
down
I'm going to go back to Faces and
Yeah.
Zoras. What were they playing inside? What
Zorini.
was it?
Well,
Disco.
can I ask,
They were disco clubs, period. That's all they played.
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the show. I wondered, you mentioned something about being one of the few people that was able to get into that club.
Yes.
Are you saying one of the few black people that was? What did
That's
you mean by that?
exactly what I'm talking about. Rush Street was extremely segregated during that time. There were a lot of small boutiques, businesses, and what have you. Barney's wasn't there, and you know where the Waldorf Astoria is?
Mm-hmm.
That used to be a parking lot on that corner.
Yeah.
I mean, all this stuff that you see there now was not there in the 60s and 70s and whatever. That stuff started coming up in the 80s, which y'all dealing with now. But when you look back then, you know, the cool thing was, you know, the few black folks that come, but everybody wanted to come to Rush Street, but everybody wasn't welcome.
Yes.
And so I was able to maneuver myself into a position because I'd always take my friends in there with me. And that would be the thing. I would add the color to the joint.
And most of
But,
your
but
most
the owners, these white folks and what have you, it was a thing where, you know, it wasn't for us.
but
You know, I go in there, Frank Sinatra would be in there.
yeah.
I mean, Jim Brown. I mean, let me tell you, during the times like Studio 54 in New York.
George, I want to ask you about some of those friends of yours because certainly, as you are the proprietor, have been the proprietor of many record stores, it was obligatory for artists to come see you when they came to town, to spend time in your record store, to spend time with those consumers who were buying the product. Was it the case that you took some of those friends with you to these nightclubs, or was it, you know, your
Well,
homies
see,
from around
this is
Chicago?
this is before I became that George.
Okay. Break it down for us.
There were so many record stores, okay? See, places like Tower and where it didn't exist, there was only one store that was white owned that sold black music in the city limits, and that was Rose Records on Wabash. It was downtown.
Rose, yep.
Merle and Aaron Rose Records. Only place you could get your music from, I don't know, if it's black music, it was from that neighborhood record store.
Metro Music.
Nah, well, Eddie Carter started even a little bit later, but me and Eddie were close, what have you. But look, there was Willie's, there was Rico's Barbershop and Records, there was Lee and Bob's Cleaners and Records. I used to sell records wholesale out the trunk of my car before I ever started George's Music.
Okay.
When years were you doing that?
That was 1968, 69, 70. And so that was when you had, you guys probably remember hearing about Barney's, right?
Of course.
Barney's one song.
Yes. Many guests
Well,
referred to
I'm going
Barney's.
to give you some real quick history. Mr. Barney, Willie Barney, his father had a barbershop at Kedzie and Roosevelt, but on the Kedzie side, one of the apartment buildings that were there, he had a store downstairs, barbershop. Well, Willie Barney is a young guy. He used to go down on Michigan Avenue. The 1200 block on Michigan Avenue to 22nd Street is Record Row. Back then, all the record labels were down on that street.
Right. We were
So
talking
when he
about
had
that.
a record store, they would go there, and he had a relationship with Capitol Records and all these different places. And he'd be bringing the records back. And you have to remember, Sam Cooke and all of them were recording in that area back then. And he would bring them back, and he'd be putting them up in this little space in his dad's barbershop. Now, his father was cutting a whole lot of black businessmen's hair. There you go.
Yeah.
Great records. Yeah, Joe Hinton had a big hit on it. But other businessmen in the community would be in there getting their heads cut, and they say, "Hey, Lil Barney, where'd you get those records from, man? I think I could sell some. Why don't you pick me up some and just add something to it? And so you make something from it, and they can sell records in their business." Barney is and this is part of Black history. The term "one stop" came about because of Willie Barney.
Wow.
Because one stop meant you go to one place and get everything you need. And he started the first one stop period, black or white,
Wow.
in the United States. And he serviced the black record stores. Then others came over the years, but I have to give him credit for those years. And Raymond, his son, is the last living offspring. Who still carries the legacy on. But it was a unique work ethic. But revolving around that, one key factor though was the music. I mean, these artists. I mean, from James Brown to Aretha Franklin, all of those groups. Not one of them sounds alike. And there was a reason for that. Because the only way you get recognized is radio would play you. And radio would not play you if you tried to sound like Aretha Franklin. Because there was no Aretha. See, this is and when you look at the list, I mean, just count down. From Gladys Knight and the Pips, Dionne Warwick, the original, Sam and Dave, Archie Bell and Girls, Bill Withers. I mean, let's go. Not one of those artists sound like another artist. I mean, it's the most amazing thing. It's like looking at the alphabet and every letter is designed differently. That's what music was back then. Now it's all about beats. Huh?
What year did you start your store, and what was the address?
3937 was the original address. That was about 1972.
1972.
Yeah, the store used to be it was the craziest thing. It was Mr. T's, not the Mr. T that was on 87th Street, but this is a guy, and I was working for this black man that had a One Stop Records Incorporated, and this is when I used to sell records wholesale out the trunk of my car. I worked for him. His office is the warehouse is on 17th in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I used to go and work. And I used to, load the trunk of my car up with those records.
Cotton Club was
And
around.
that's how. And at one point, I had close to like 300 accounts. There were hardware stores, cleaners. Everybody had records.
Mm-hmm.
And I was selling records. At one point, it got to a level where I was selling $100,000 worth of music a month out the trunk of my car.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Why would you want to open a store if you were doing business that well out the trunk of your car?
Well, I mean, it's a thing of being, that individual. And I was working for somebody. I was getting paid very well because I made a percentage of my sales.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But, you're looking at somebody that's 23, 24, the entrepreneurial thing. And see, back then, when you grew up, my parents had restaurants and stuff, so I knew what it was to be a merchant in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But can you imagine growing up from a child and every place you went into was black owned in your neighborhood? I mean, every place. From the hardware store, everything. The clothes you bought, everything. That's what made the difference. See, and we expect young people to have these creative ideas, what they're gonna sell and who they're gonna sell it to.
Mm-hmm.
Only thing they know is hip hop and hip hop clothes and the music.
Mm-hmm.
And they project like the lyrics and the actions in these videos are real. they don't know the difference between entertainment and real life. And see, so and the music reflects it, the lifestyle reflects it, the clothing, and see, so there's no diversity in hip hop, none whatsoever. It's not just the music; it's the lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. All right, so
When the last time your young people you ever heard them play a slow jam? they never slow down.
Jam.
Their brain,
Even LL Cool J had a slow jam. It's a shame they don't have any. Those
yeah, going back. I love you. No, I do. His first one, because it was going back to Cali on one side.
I Need Love.
I Need Love.
Yeah,
that was his first 2 hit records. No, I see the 45 right now. I Need Love was on one side and going back to Cali, to Cali. That was on the other side.
Look, I got in trouble trying to play some of those uncut songs many years ago. So, but let's go back to 1972. 1972, you're starting your store. What was the address again?
3937 Roosevelt. See, all of my locations were right there
On Roosevelt Road. That's right.
Yeah, 39, 37, 39, 21, 39, 23, 21, and eventually where we really got well known was 39, 15.
Can I ask a question about that? Because that happened right sort of after so much of a tumultuous period, especially on the West Side.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the riots.
The assassination of Dr. King.
Absolutely. So, I mean, on the heels of that, I'm wondering what the community that you settled into was like, and how were you received with the record store, with your business?
Well, it was difficult for a minute because I looked so doggone young. Everybody thought it was my daddy's place. It wasn't that much inventory I had to start with. I brought my record player from home, and I convinced the landlord to give me 90 days credit on the rent.
Wow.
My rent was $125 a month.
Awesome.
Yeah. And see, so I was my only employee the first 3 years.
Yes.
And see, so it was basically a work ethic. It's not what you imagine it is today, because many of the artists back in the day, they had a hit record, but they also had a day job.
Mm-hmm.
And see, it was just ironic that there was a gap in between. I worked for my dad and a couple other businesses before I wound up with my own store. But my career actually started about the fall of the 64 and the 65 and a few years after that at Chess Records.
Mm-hmm.
That was 21, where the Blues Museum is now.
Yes.
2120 Michigan. I got a job there. It just so happened the summer of 64 that I graduated, Hirsch. I was hanging out and I met this young lady. We started dating and she had one more year at Hyde Park High School. And I was working at Montgomery Ward on Chicago Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to Luke Junior College, which is now
Harold Washington. I teach there now, George.
Oh, man. Hey, you got to talk about that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And so I would get off work and what have you, and go to school because I went in the evenings. Then I go meet her and what have you, depending on the day. But she had a part-time job at Chess Records.
Mm.
And she sang background. That was Minnie Riperton.
Oh,
Are you
wow.
kidding me?
That's how I wound up in the music business, because of her.
Are you telling me you dated Minnie Riperton?
Yes, I did.
I've heard
started
this
in 64.
before, yes.
And it lasted about 68. Because she graduated Hyde Park in 65. I came out of Hirsch in 64. But then it's because of her I wound up getting a job at Chess Records. And I was like Etta James Driver, where I was like 18. And I did things around the studio as a cleanup man, all kinds of stuff. Then I wound up going on the road being a driver for Billy Stewart. That's like the movie Cadillac Records.
Yeah.
Which was, they just took too much,
Creative license.
unnecessary freedom in that.
Yeah.
But under any event, that's where I got groomed. And in those days, it was amazing what artists had to do. But I was part of that era. But yeah, it was because of Minnie I wound up in the music business.
How did that happen?
What happened?
Well, she was influential in your life. And
Like I said, I was hanging out that summer of 64.
Yeah.
And I'm just a teenager hanging out, and I meet this young lady. And she lives in Woodlawn. As a matter of fact, it's on 61st of Woodlawn. That's where her family lived. And we started going out and dating. I had the job at Montgomery Ward, going to Luke Junior College. She was still had one more year at Hyde Park High School. And so we would meet, have fun on the weekends and so on and so forth. I had a job working at Marlowe Machine Center. This is back in the day. Y'all probably had, the way you do laser printing and stuff now. They were machines called the Gestetner and all these other things back in the day that printed. This black man had this place at 95th and Halsted, and I worked for him. And I also had a company car. So I could run around. It wasn't a brand new car, but on any event, I was kind of unique for that era, And I was going to Luke Jr. at that time. And see, the main reason I go to Luke because I didn't want to go to Vietnam. So I got my ass to school.
I hear you.
Very smart.
And see, so in any event, Minnie and I met that fall because this was before she was well known. I mean, she sang background on some songs, like Fontella Bass, Rescue Me, Take Me. That's Minnie in the background.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. And see, so she did background for Bo Diddley, Ramsey Lewis, that Le Fleur, who sound like angels. That's Minnie. She did a tour to replace Etta James to stand in for her because Etta James had problems legally and couldn't leave the country.
Wow.
And there was this hit record in the basement. That's where it's at with Etta James and Sugar Pie DeSanto. And so Minnie, she was so young and going out on the road, her and my mother really became close. It was just amazing. But yeah, it was
There's another
that's
title,
how I wound up in the business.
Heart and Soul, that talks about that era. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's a thing. Like right now, since y'all can't see me, I don't know if you can. Can y'all see me?
We can see you.
Yeah, we can see you.
Oh, okay, you see the shirt I'm wearing?
Can't see.
Sam
Sam
Cooke.
Cooke.
Hold it up. Stand up a little bit.
Can't see it.
Oh, Sam Cooke.
That's Sam Cooke.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding.
Sam Cooke.
Lauren
Sam
gets
Cooke
that
was
one.
such a big influence
Yes.
on the black music in this city because he's the one that influenced Curtis Mayfield to start Curtime Records. I mean,
Wow.
it was so amazing. And see, he was like 33 when he was assassinated because that was no fluke. That was intentional because the Italians were running the record business back then. And Sam was educating. He was teaching how to own. He was teaching about publishing. Black folks didn't know that. And that's what he was doing. I mean, Ray Charles would even give credit to Sam Cooke for encouraging him to start a label. See, so it's a thing. And here in Chicago, like I said, on 12th Street, Michigan Avenue to 22nd Street, historically is known as Record Row.
Yep, we were
You go
talking
on
about that
YouTube
earlier.
And Google Record Row, and you see the episode. WTTW did the documentary.
Yeah.
And Etta James narrates it.
Wow. Gotta check that
so,
out.
I was a part of that history, that era. And I mean, it's a thing to realize that the first label the Beatles were ever on was a black-owned label, VJ Records. Vivian and James.
Here in Chicago, correct?
Yeah. 1451 South Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the history. I mean, Earth, Wind, and Fire. When I started at Chess Records, Maurice White, he was Ramsey Lewis's drummer.
Wow.
And Maurice White and Charles Stephanie, a producer at Chess, who does a bunch of stuff. As a matter of fact, I'm still in touch with his daughter. Charles Stephanie and Maurice White got together and they created Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Can you
Charles
talk?
was the producer. It was Maurice's concept, and it's so funny. Verdine White, Verdine learned to play the bass from one of the baddest bass players at Chess Records. That was Louis Satterfield. No, Pete Cousy. Excuse me.
Can you talk, George, a little bit about what that the culture of collaboration was like back then? you know, it's
Oh.
important. People were working together a lot more, it seems.
Yeah, and you know something? The unique thing, you know how you see people nowadays, they be in the studio for 48, 36 hours and all that stuff? They didn't do that back in those days. They'd be at the clubs. Like here in Chicago, man, there were so many clubs, and every club had a live house band. You know, there wasn't no DJs. Heck, for intermission, it was a jukebox. But every place had a live band. And so, I mean, Tyrone Davis, I'll use him again. He used to be Barney's delivery man. Tyrone was known, his name was Tyrone the Wonder Boy to start. But all of the clubs on the south side, west side, they supported, or I'll put it like this, people worked that played in bands, they made a few bucks every night. I mean, on 39th Street, you had Peyton Place. On Halstead, you had the Bonanza. On 55th Street, the Checkmate. 63rd and Ashland Celebrity Club. High Chaparral, 55th. You had the Club de Lisa, 55th Estate. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Mm-hmm. And there were so many musicians because every place had a house band.
Okay.
Yeah, my dad talks about that a lot. They grew up, you know, on the south side of Chicago, and they said, you know, there wasn't a such thing as a DJ.
Oh, of course not. No, it was a jukebox.
You went to see the performers. That's what your night out was.
That's it. Well, you know, there was, you know, when they did Cadillac Records, like I said, which most of it was a lie. But the things that they didn't really mention, you know, like WVON.
Mm-hmm.
The two guys, Lennon Field Chess, they're the ones that started WVON in 1963.
Okay.
The two Jewish guys that owned Chess Records.
Mm-hmm.
It was WVON. It was 1,000 watts. It was the most powerful, important black radio station in America back then. And it was on 34th and Kedzie. The building's still there, but it had the big antenna going south just before you go over the 35th Street Bridge on Kedzie. Oh, yeah. That's where. I think it's a Latino Mexican station has it now, but that's where WVO and it was owned by. That's how I first met Herb Kennedy, Rodney Jones. They used to come down to Chess Records to get their paychecks. That's where Don Cornelius started. I don't know if y'all knew, Don Cornelius used to be a policeman. Then he was an insurance man also.
Yeah, he was on the police force with my uncle.
This guy,
yeah,
and he's gonna give him a ticket. So he gave him a ticket, and so when he gave the guy the ticket, the guy in the car said, "Here, have you ever thought about being in radio?" And he gave him his card. That was Wesley South. Wesley South was the news guy at WVON.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, he was the one with Purvis Spann that bought WVON. But he was the guy that gave Don Cornelius his first job in radio.
Nice. You're dropping knowledge.
Have you ever heard of Jack Cooper?
Jack Cooper. The name sounds familiar. What did he do?
Well, he was the first black. He had a first black radio station here in Chicago.
No,
black owned and operated.
With Al Benson and them, and
that's right.
Richard Stamps.
Yeah, that's my uncle.
Oh shoot! Look. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
My granduncle.
I'll be darned. Well, he was part of that era because those radio personalities. The reason how they kept their jobs is because usually they will be the voice of a particular business in the city, like Al Abrams Pontiac. There would be certain disc jockeys. That's the only ones that would do Al Benson or Al, you know, the Al Abrams. And so you had Ernie Banks Ford. A lot of folks never talk about that on 76 and Stony Island, one of the first black dealerships. Ernie Banks.
I remember that.
Ford. Then on 74th and Halstead, you had Al Johnson Oldsmobile, the first black General Motors dealership. And then he sold it to R.L. Duke.
That's crazy. Can I ask a quick question about the transition? Yeah. I like the point that you brought up about the clubs were in existence, and Chicago had a proliferation of clubs. You know, people needed an outlet, and they made those spaces happen because we had black music, and so you needed a space. When did that transition happen between the live music and the DJs. And I know that you
Oh,
have
well, it's
very
not-
firsthand experience with
Well,
that.
it started with your house music. That's where it
Not with
started.
disco.
Oh, well, again, disco and house was right there together. Disco
Yeah,
was
so you
more
kinda-
on. Disco was more pop. It was
Okay.
pop music.
Right.
But then there was buying, and then see, so you had, there a number of artists who shifted their music and their songs and created disco mixes.
Exactly.
That
Okay,
was not the
so-
labels. That wasn't the labels' decision. The labels
Yeah,
who
well,
wanted to get the radio
labels
airplay.
out there, well, they had the soldiers on the street, and what was ever happening at the club,
Yes.
and what was ever being played on radio determined it. Like I was saying, there's only one James Brown, one Ray Charles, one Aretha, all of them, because radio wouldn't play you if you sound like somebody.
Right.
Right.
And see, so now it's so different. But now when you're talking about going back to, the disco and then like the soul music, right? Well, it had its own identity, and every artist had their own identity. And they sang songs. You had up tempo, you had slow jams, you had steppers cuts. But it's a funny thing, but there was never a genre of music called steppers music.
Right.
That's right.
It
Okay,
was.
it was the DJs that found it, preferably at the beginning, Herb Kent. He started, he had a number of DJs back in the day. But that's what really created it. But when R. Kelly did the Step in the Name of Love in the video, that just blew it out the water. That's what created the image of that dance for Chicago. And then when you listen to the music that's relative to it, I mean, it's so much music that relates to stepping.
Was there a similar phenomenon like that, a tipping point, if you will, for house music, in your opinion?
I could say so, because house, disco, and what have you, when turned into hip, because it was more freestyle dancing.
Mm-hmm.
It was an individual. He didn't have to have nobody, no partner. And that's when it changes, just like what it is now. People just jump on the damn dance floor.
That's a great observation. That's a very interesting observation
Yeah.
about the music form. It was very different, and that's why people study house dance and how it is different and how they sort of different forms of house dance have evolved.
Well, it's self-explanatory. Well, it's self-explanatory. I mean, you out there all by yourself, just like when you go to the picnic, the house picnic. Ain't nobody dancing with anybody. It's like Woodstock back in the day.
Right.
The version of Woodstock. And see, so that's when it changed. And I saw it like firsthand, because I would always be in New York because of me. Once my store in the 90s, I became that dude in the country. I was the first person of color on the board of NARM, which is the most powerful retail organization in the world. National Association of Recording Merchandisers. 9 members on the board. I was the first person of color to ever be on that board.
Wow.
Because these are all retail stores. This is Tower Records and Target stores and all of that. And here, I was able to position myself to do that. But again, we'd have to do a series of this stuff to talk about my mentors. It's just like the Black Godfather, Clarence Avant.
Yes.
He was one of my mentors.
Yeah.
But then him, and here in Chicago, Ernie and George Leaner at 1831 South Michigan, United Record Distributor. They were the first black distributor of major labels in the United States. Al Bell gave them Stax exclusively. Barry Gordy gave them Tamla and Soul. They had their own recording studio on the second floor. And they were distributors of major. Al Bell gave them Stax out of Memphis.
Wow.
And see, and these were my mentors.
Can
Actually, when I opened my store the year afterwards, Ernie Leaner, owner of United, he treated me like a son. His son and I were very close. And I opened that store on my own, and he found it himself to take me to my first NARM convention in 1973. I'm down here with my record store, the only person of color with a record store there, because this is all major corporate stuff. But Ernie Leaner took me there.
could you
Exposed me to that way back, and then this is 1973. I wound up on the Board and Arm in the 1990s.
George, can you talk a little bit about the importance of distribution in the music industry as a whole? How critical is it that there were retailers and distributors of music?
Yeah, well, that's the only way it got exposed because, people look at it like it's ancient back then, but it was actually human beings that determined if you even got chosen. If you sang somewhere and what have you, it'd be somebody like me that would call the A&R at CVS or at MCA and say, hey, so-and-so, this is guy down here, you need to come see him. Me being a retailer, they would fly into Chicago and I take them to the club.
Mm-hmm.
I influenced getting Crucial Conflict signed and Do or Die signed, and what have you, because they hung out at my store all the time. They were little boys. And see, so, from Common to Twister. And see, but I learned the game from when I was selling records out trunk of my car and the whole thing, working at Chess Records, understanding what it was to be an artist. And so in the 90s, after I went through my struggles of being able to develop into an important merchant, and it turned out to be the 90s. And we did it. We did it. It was great. It was so phenomenal. I miss it. I miss it so much, but it happened upon it at the peak. I had 15 full-time employees, and they all walked to work. I gave them their first jobs. That's something I'm so proud of that. And see, that's what we're missing today. It'll never come back because now it's so online shopping and so on and so forth. So, that personal contact, that human to human relationships that you build in community. It's scary when you look at it now with these young people. Their best friend is their cell phone.
Well, we've been certainly forced to that experience through our current climate now. That human contact that you talked about has been so important historically. We were certainly hoping to have this discussion with you in the studios of WNUR, but certainly thrilled that you joined us tonight on this technological platform. You nailed it. We have gem after gem here of history.
I would love to do it again, and either way to go to the studio, we do it like this again. Being quarantined, and I'm drinking my quarantini.
All right.
This is George's first Zoom call, by the way.
Exactly.
Cheers.
Yeah, this is first. You're a star already. But this is a great way for us to share your story. You have decades worth of history that we really need to unpack and really discuss more. And we really need to focus maybe decade by decade. You have so much to really share with us because Chicago has changed so much. You've seen all that change. We focus this show mainly on house music, but what we know and what we're trying to target for this year is to understand, trying to put together a timeline that really what was happening before house music started and then what happened every year thereafter.
Yeah, well, I can help you do it because the house thing, because there was some Betty Wright. They flipped some Betty Wright songs in the house music.
Yes.
Look, let's talk about, the transition before it just became beats. This before the technology came in. They would just speed up and add certain things because the technology hadn't gotten to the point. I actually had the first Pioneer CD players, the Pioneer 1500s. When they first started with the CDs and so on and so forth. But when it comes to the music, it was the 12 inches.
Yeah.
And it was just like, when Motown called themselves trying to Barry Gordy didn't know what the hell that was. But as a retailer, I knew what it was. It's just like when you were saying about you, there was certain music you couldn't play.
Yeah.
Remember, Lauren?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, at home, what happened? Well, see, George's musical, I was the first parental advisory sticker before they had a sticker. Little boy, you can't buy this. You know, if you want this, you get your mama or your daddy to come get it.
Takes a village.
I was strict on that. I wouldn't play no explicit lyrics. When we opened the store in the morning, because I'd opened up so early. Because, man, I was a hustler like you would not believe. I would open up early, and I'd have the speakers outside. And you know what? Nobody would complain because I played gospel.
That's good. Yeah.
People would be on the bus stop listening to me playing gospel. And you know, by 12 o'clock, I used to do it like a radio station.
That's great.
Nice.
George, one of our viewers asked a question about Purvis Spann.
Yes.
DJ Thomas Peace wanted to know if you knew Purvis Spann, his cousin.
Oh, God, yes. It's his daughter that owns WVON.
Oh, there you go.
Midway Broadcasting. Melanie Spann.
That's
Purvis.
that's right.
That's Purvis's daughter.
How about
See,
that?
Purv is the one that, like I told you earlier, him and Wesley South put their money together and bought WVON.
Amazing.
Do y'all know what the call letters meant for WVON?
Voice of the Negro, right?
There you go. Oh yeah, everybody don't know that. The Voice of the Negro that 2 Jews own.
Right.
How about that?
Oxymoronic a bit, but
Hey, yeah.
how things started. So,
But I would love to do this again. I know you
Let's
guys,
do
the
it.
time is getting short, but
yeah,
there's so many subjects that we can go on, and I want to talk about all those black record labels that were here, and the clubs, and then the lifestyle that led into disco. I mean, I can tell you when Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes used to come to the High Chaparral on 79th and Stony Alley. 78th and Stony, and had that building jumping.
I can't let you go
This is
without.
when Teddy was the drummer. Because, most folks know Teddy Pendergrass was Harold's drummer before he became a solo artist.
Wow. Yeah. You got my attention with the lifestyle that led into disco. I know that's probably a whole new show, but
There's no doubt. Well, it was the clothing, it was the bell bottom, the brothers with the afros.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I remember it. I was old enough to remember that. I was right there with Disco DAI.
George, next time you come on the show, we want some pictures of you back in that day. I want to see the outfits you had on.
Oh boy, I'm gonna have to really go in the crates for that.
We want to see that big afro.
Oh yeah, and my big eyeglasses. I had some big glasses.
That's all right.
Got some cool glasses now too.
he's got
Yeah, I can't get away. And I don't need them anymore. I had the surgery.
LASIK.
Yeah, you just like looking cool.
Your portfolio of photographs, though. You unlocked that a few of those drawers back in the day, and I would love to see some of those.
I've been thinking about it because I have boxes of pictures in public storage.
Yeah, we
I
gotta.
gotta get. I mean, not small boxes, big boxes.
Yep, I'm
And
sure.
They need to be curated. I swear.
We
They should be curated.
our Dance Music
We
Research
talked
and
about that
Archiving
for
Foundation.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our foundation, but we definitely need sort of a larger group. I think there's what you have in your knowledge across the board is so critical as we think about Black music. It's supposed to be Chicago's Year of Music. I don't even understand how they could not do that without you being in every month, every conversation.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, I was really disappointed that I wasn't, included, because I went to some of the other meetings last year, whatever, and so when I saw it, I said, "Whoa!" And then the things that I heard them talking about, and then, there's nobody really. There's a few people still alive. I don't know if they're as active as me that could really express the history of Record Row, along with the rest of the other stuff, and so I was highly disappointed because what'll happen is then they'll have that fake stuff, y'all know, Lee Farmer, right?
Yep.
And Gina.
Yep. And
Okay,
Gina's
my
dad.
father.
Yeah,
Gina
those are my
Farmer.
neighbors.
Well, he was one of my mentors also at Chess Records.
Yeah.
You see, he's one of the few, in his 90s, that's still just as sharp and baby.
Yes, he is.
I would love to be on the show with me and him.
All
That's
right.
a great idea.
We
Let's
make it
that
happen.
He could. I'm gonna tell you something. His mind is just as sharp, and I tell you that would be something unique.
I could yell out my
And
door.
to be videotaped so you can keep it. Because
And,
he's a walking library. He was there.
yeah.
He was as a producer. Ramsey Lewis was in the studio. I mean, oh God, the Dells, Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, John Lee Hooker. This is like before me getting in.
Yeah.
But I saw those records, and I don't know which one Gene, and Gene had his own album called Jammin' with Mr. G.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you knew about that one, but Gene Barge. And so he would be a great interview.
Yes.
So, George, when are you going to write a book?
Well, when y'all go and show me how to do that shit.
George,
I'm old school.
we've been talking about that.
We will be over your place, but
That's
with
right.
social distancing, and meet next week, George. Don't play games. You know how I feel about this, you
We're
guys.
going to make it happen.
We're gonna make
Let's
this
go,
happen.
hey.
This is critical.
Let's go to work. I mean, it's a thing
Go
we
to work.
Yeah.
Hey,
George,
George,
don't play games. You know I will do that. So I'll talk to you next week about that. We'll set up a time, but we will be separately. You got a great place. Your building allows us to distance and get to work. So we're gonna do that next week.
Oh, for sure.
so, George, I know you're a fashionable guy, and one of our viewers, Thomas Peace, fan DJ Peace, he asked me to ask you about the red bottom sneakers at Hurley's party in December.
Oh, yeah. Those are the first pair of Christian Louboutins I ever had. And I didn't buy them. My wife got one of her clients to buy them for me for my birthday.
Wait,
Those
That's
things
what's
are like
up.
$1,000. I ain't
Wow.
Yeah, but
You are
they're
super
some
fast.
good looking shoes though.
Nice. I'm sure at $1,000.
Because there's some stuff I've been seeing on Facebook. I can see they look just like they were like knockoff. They called her Louis, and I called my wife and sent the pictures, and she had a picture. She said, "No, them knockoff."
Yeah, don't mess with those.
Yeah, but them Christian Louboutins, I got red bottoms. Oh boy!
real.
All right,
Very
guys.
good.
All right, we good?
We appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. We definitely got to do it again.
I'm,
You're awesome.
Amazing, amazing.
thank you so
Definitely.
much.
Feel like
Thanks
we
for
just
inviting
scratched
me,
the surface.
and I'll look forward because once I get going, there's so much information and young people need to hear a lot of this stuff to get them curious. Yeah, I talk some stuff, then then you got to look it up. They just Google it.
That's
Well,
right.
you are a true
Need to hear this.
Greek.
Everyone,
You're
not just old
yeah.
young people.
you are a
I would
griot,
like to
George.
continue because the way we were skipping
Yeah.
around subjects and eras, because I tell you, we could take it from the 60s all the way to current.
Well,
We will.
we look forward to that.
You know?
We look
I
forward
would
to doing
enjoy
that with you.
I would enjoy that.
All right.
All right.
We've enjoyed
Thank you,
having
guys.
you.
It's my pleasure.
Stay well. Stay safe.
And drink my quarantinis.
Cheers to the quarantining.
I got the water going.
All right. See y'all later.
All right.
Thank you, George.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Well, we look forward to that.
All right, team. We had a great guest.
We've enjoyed having
We learned so much information. It's unbelievable.
Stay safe.
Guys, what are we doing next week?
I don't know. We got a lot to talk about, though. I'm guessing we'll still be locked down,
Definitely.
So May
but
1st.
we're going to be here. We'll do it next week. We got so much to talk about. So if we continue with our timeline, which I think we should, I
Yes.
think we get into the late 70s and we really drill down. We start talking about some of those clubs and those people. I know that, in particular, I want to sort of unpack some of what we talked about tonight, and especially like faces. I kind of remember Rush Street in the mid 70s. It was sort of sort of this magical.
It was elusive. Absolutely. And
So I think we got a lot to unpack, and then we're going to get into the 80s
yay. Yep.
in a couple weeks.
Absolutely. We've got a couple of other guests that we'll have on, like the surprise that we had with George Daniels tonight. And we'll continue.
I thought you had a guest. Can we announce the guest, or are we going to surprise the guest?
We're going to surprise the guests because
Will they know they're going to be a guest?
they they are working to get that confirmation in. And
Good.
but
We don't want to want to catch them in their bathrobe or
That could be a great show. That could be a nice show.
Well, you know,
catching people in their bathrobes.
there is a protocol for these Zoom meetings.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Hannah. Thanks for watching. Elaine Batson, nice to hear from you. Thanks for watching, guys.
Yep.
Appreciate
I
you.
can't see. We've got a few people on.
Batman is watching. Robert
All
Ellis,
right.
what's up?
What's up,
You gotta
Batman?
come back on the show, dude. We need you.
Yep.
And I need to talk to you about Pembroke Township. That's another story.
But 5 years, guys. Let's talk quickly about 5 years. All the great guests we've had.
5
And we
years
have
of Vintage
so much
House.
more.
Let's see.
5 years. We have so many more.
I'm gonna
people.
take us
Lil
through.
Lil Lewis not on the. Oh, look at that.
We've
While you're
got
sharing screen. See, this is the magic of technology. You can bring up your screens.
an incredible array of our shows here.
And we're missing some too. I just looked at
Yes.
some of the videos. I completely left off whole groups of people on this list. So we've got to really drill it down.
Yeah.
Some of those people who are on the show, we don't have them, we've somehow missed it. We need to tell them.
Roy Davis,
that,
DJ Spank, Louis Green, Charles Matlock, James
Spank
Vincent.
passed away, by the way, so rest in peace. We've gotten some people, Craig Cannon, on this show who are no longer with us.
Yes.
We're very blessed to have had some really great people on. But people were missing. We still haven't had Dwayne Powell, right? Laura, you're bringing him in?
Yeah, Dwayne, you got to get on the show. So many folks.
Indeed.
So listen, I did the little post earlier. I had to take it down, but there's a lot of architects a house and so many stories to tell. And that's what this is about. So each week we're going to bring you more stories. If you feel like you have a story to tell and that you were influential in the scene or whether you just, want to be part of this energy, let us hear from you. We welcome you to be a part of it and to talk to us about your stories. There's so much to unpack, and we really appreciate everybody watching and tuning in and asking questions and being on the show with us.
And
5 years is a long time, Lauren.
I didn't realize how long it was until I just started doing this.
there's a big round of applause on 5.
All of you all, thank you
You,
all.
Lauren's baby. She's the one who started it.
Dance music found on Instagram, the Vintage House Show on Facebook, also Vintage House Show Instagram. Check us out. Please check out the podcast, vintagehouseshow.com. All of your favorite episodes are going up there every week, and we will continue our live shows. We want you all to stay safe and sound, and so we'll continue through the end of April for sure, conducting our social distancing interviews. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Lori, you're going to take us out with some hotness on the decks.
I can't hear you. I can't hear it.
I'll take it out a little bit.
All right. This is the Vintage House Show with your hosts, Lori Branch, Mega, Lauren Lowry, super duper producer, and curators. Let's go.
Show, we need a Vintage House, just Lori Branch spinning like everyone's been doing. When we gonna do that, Lori Branch?
She can't hear you.
Yeah, it's party time.
All right, y'all.